When a battered German shepherd dragged an unconscious 18-year-old into a crowded hospital lobby, everyone froze. But the real shock came seconds later, when a rugged 45-year-old man stepped in behind them, his clothes torn, his eyes grim, and a warning whisper on his lips. No one knew who the teen was. No one knew why the dog refused to leave his side. And absolutely no one expected the dark trail of ropes, footprints, and a secret hidden deep in the forest. A secret that man and dog uncovered together. Before we start, make sure to hit, like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. The morning cold clung to the cedar-lined valley, a pale winter fog drifting low over the snow like breath held by the world itself. Jack Whitmore walked alone through the frost-thickened woods, his boots sinking into the crusted drifts with each slow, deliberate step. He moved like someone accustomed to silence, not afraid of it, not comforted by it, but bearing it as a man bears an old wound. Jack's tall frame, worn from years of self-imposed exile, seemed almost carved from the frozen landscape. At 45, he stood 1.82 meters, his build still lean and strong from a lifetime of physical labor, yet thinner than it once had been. His face was angular, shadowed by days-old stubble, the kind that spoke of someone who had long stopped caring about appearances. His dark brown hair grown slightly too long, and brushing the back of his neck was streaked with gray at the temples, earned gray born of grief more than age. His eyes, a deep, storm-beaten gray, carried the emptiness of memories he refused to confront. Wrapped in his battered dark brown leather coat, a reddened navy flannel beneath it, faded jeans, and cold-worn boots, he looked less like a man walking through the forest, and more like a piece of it weathered quiet, half-broken, and stubbornly surviving. The isolation was his choice, though some days he doubted it. Since the tragedy years ago, the day his daughter never came home, Jack had withdrawn into the woods outside Cedar Springs, where no one expected him to talk, to smile, or to pretend he was whole. Here the wind did not judge. The trees did not pity, and the silence never asked him to heal. But that morning the silence cracked. It began as a thin, ragged sound so faint that Jack thought the wind had caught on something brittle. He paused, held his breath, and there it was again, a low, strained whimper. A sound of pain. A sound no winter wind could make. Jack's muscles tensed instantly. Without hesitation, he abandoned the trail and pushed through the thicket, his boots slipping on the icy slope. The closer he moved, the sharper, the sound became a trembling plea for help carried weakly across the snow. When he reached the bottom of the incline, the world seemed to stop. A young man no older than 18 lay collapsed in the frost. His body shivered uncontrollably, his skin ghost-pale beneath smears of dirt and dried blood. His lips were a dangerous purple, the color of a boy who had spent too long in the cold. His hands. Jack's chest tightened when he saw them. The teen's wrists were swollen and raw, ringed with ugly red grooves that could only have been carved by rope, pulled too tight for far too long. His clothes, once a simple gray hoodie and dark jeans, were torn in ways that spoke of struggle escape or both. And beside him, trembling on 3 legs, was a German shepherd. The dog's coat, black and tan, though matted with mud and streaked with blood, bristled as it tried to pull the young man forward, gripping a torn piece of the boy's clothes between its teeth. The shepherd's back leg dragged in the snow, soaked with dried blood, and fresh, freezing moisture bent awkwardly as if badly wounded. But the dog refused to stop. Its amber eyes glowed with a mix of terror and determination. This wasn't just an animal trying to survive. It was an animal trying to save someone. Jack froze only for a moment, stunned by the sheer desperation etched into both boy and dog. Then instinct overrode everything else. He rushed forward, kneeling beside the unconscious young man. Up close, Jack could hear the boy's breath, thin, shallow, faltering. The kind of breathing that could end at any moment. The boy's head fell limply against Jack's shoulder when he lifted him, and Jack felt the heat of fever emanating from his half-frozen skin. "Jesus, kid," Jack muttered under his breath, a rare crack in his usually emotionless voice. The German Shepherd stepped in immediately, forcing its way close to Jack, its muzzle brushing the boy's arm, as if urging the man not to take him away. It let out a low, warning growl, not hostile but protective. Deeply protective. Easy Jack murmured, staring into the dog's frantic eyes. "I'm helping him. I swear." The dog hesitated, chest heaving, then pressed itself against Jack's leg, as if saying, "Then I'm coming too." Carrying the young man in his arms, Jack trudged through the snow, the dog limping at his side. Each time Jack slipped, the shepherd whined anxiously, and each time the boy's breath stuttered, the dog nudged his arm as though willing him to stay alive. By the time they reached Cedar Springs Medical Center, Jack's muscles burned, and his breath came in frosted bursts. But when he shoved the doors open, the warmth of the hospital collided with a moment of collective shock. Nurses, patients, and staff froze. A rugged man covered in snow and bruising cold, holding a dying 18-year-old in his arms. A wounded German Shepherd staggering behind him, blood on its fur eyes blazing with fear and warning. The first nurse to move was a woman in her early 30s, short blonde hair tucked behind her ears, light brown eyes sharp with instinct. Her name badge read Emily Carter, and though she was small in stature, she carried herself with quick, capable authority. "Sir, put him here." She rushed forward, guiding Jack toward a gurney. But Ranger, though no one yet knew his name, lunged in front of the gurney, snarling his voice, a raw, scraping sound of desperation. Several nurses gasped, stepping back. One whispered, "Is he attacking Jack?" Immediately shielded the boy with his body, then reached out with one gloved hand, resting it gently on the dog's head. The shepherd's growl faltered the instant it felt Jack's touch. Ranger Jack said softly, the name coming to him intuitively, as if the dog had whispered it to him. "Let them help the kid." The dog's entire body shuddered then, with visible reluctance and exhaustion. It stepped aside. Inside the emergency room, doctors gathered. One of them, Dr. Michael Harris, a man in his late 50s with a lined face, salt and pepper beard, and calm but commanding presence, began barking orders. Jack watched from behind the glass as they examined the boy. Severe hypothermia, extreme dehydration, deep bruising in multiple stages of healing, rope wounds, internal trauma, signs of captivity. Jack's pulse throbbed painfully in his ears. He had seen something like this before, too similar, too close to the nightmare that had ruined his life. He clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. Ranger, lying on his side, now still bleeding, still trembling, lifted his head weakly each time a doctor moved. Jack placed a hand on the glass. Something dark shifted in the hallway behind him. A faint shuffle light, deliberate wrong. Ranger's ears pricked. Even in his fading strength, he growled, low eyes locked on the dim corner where the fluorescent lights didn't quite reach. Jack slowly turned his storm-gray eyes, narrowing. Someone had been there. Someone had followed them. And someone wasn't done. Snow drifted lazily past the hospital windows, soft flakes dissolving into the glass, as a growing tension thickened the sterile air inside Cedar Springs Medical Center. Jack Whitmore sat stiffly on a metal chair in a small assessment room near the emergency wing, his tall frame casting a long shadow against the wall. Though his soaked coat had been removed, he still wore his red and navy flannel shirt, the sleeves pushed to his elbows, as if he felt too trapped beneath the hospital lights. His hands rested on his knees, fingers curled, betraying the pressure he fought to keep inside. The silence of the room wasn't kind. It pressed on Jack like a weight, like the silence he had lived with for years after losing his daughter. Except now, instead of grief, the silence carried suspicion. 2 police officers entered. Jack recognized the type immediately measured steps, alert eyes, hands near their belts. The first was Detective Raymond Holt, a man in his mid-40s with a square jaw, close-cropped black hair beginning to gray, and a stare shaped by thousands of interrogations. He had the calm, hardened demeanor of someone who had seen too many tragedies and no longer trusted first appearances. The second was Officer Caleb Myers, a younger patrolman in his late 20s, lean and a bit tense with sandy hair, pale skin, and a nervous rigidity that suggested he was still new to handling high-stakes situations. Holt's voice was steady as he sat across from Jack. "Sir, you brought in an 18-year-old male with significant injuries. We need your statement." Jack looked at him, jaw tightening slightly. "I found him in the woods," he said, voice low and controlled. He wasn't alone. Holt raised an eyebrow. The dog Jack confirmed. German Shepherd, hurt worse than the boy, and still trying to drag him. Officer Myers shifted. "You live nearby?" Jack hesitated a fraction of a second, long enough for Holt to notice. "In the forest." "North Ridge." Jack answered. "Been there a while." "Alone?" Myers asked. The question struck deeper than intended. Alone had been Jack's entire identity since the day he buried his daughter. He swallowed the burn in his chest and gave a small nod. Holt leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, you understand how this looks. A recluse from the woods shows up with a half-dead teenager and a bleeding dog. No witnesses. No explanation." Jack met his gaze, storm-gray eyes hardening. "I didn't hurt that kid." Holt didn't respond with belief. He just studied him. Jack's pulse thudded in his throat, anger, frustration, and something sharp beneath it. He had lived years being judged by silence, by his own reflection. But being suspected of harming a child, or in this case a young man, stirred something fierce and wounded in him. Before Holt could continue, the door swung open. Emily Carter entered. Her blonde hair was tied back in a quick bun, a few loose strands clinging to her cheeks from rushing through the halls. She was small, but her presence filled the room instantly. "Detective Holt," she said firmly, "you've got the wrong angle." Holt turned subtly, mildly surprised by her interruption. "Ms. Carter, I was there?" Emily pressed her voice steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. "Jack carried that boy in like he was carrying his own family, and the dog ranger nearly collapsed trying to protect him." Her gaze sharpened. "No one risking that much is the attacker." Myers shifted awkwardly, while Holt absorbed her words. Emily continued. "Ranger didn't trust us at first, but he trusted Jack. That tells me something." Jack blinked in quiet surprise. Few people stood up for him, especially strangers. Holt rubbed his jaw, studying Jack again now with a nuanced skepticism instead of outright suspicion. "Until we confirm more, Mr. Whitmore still needs to stay available for questioning." "I'm not going anywhere," Jack muttered. As the officers stepped out to make calls, Emily let out a breath she'd been holding. She turned to Jack. "Are you all right?" Jack looked away, uncomfortable with attention. "Fine," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Emily's empathy sharpened. "They're just doing their job," she offered. "Doesn't make it feel any better," Jack replied. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden scrape of metal in the hallway. A nurse sprinted past the door. The dog he's getting up, Emily's eyes widened. Ranger She hurried out, Jack following with long, quick strides. In a treatment bay near the emergency ward, Ranger stood on trembling legs, an IV line dangling loosely from his flank. The German shepherd's coat was rough-matted with dried blood, and his left hind leg shook violently beneath his weight. But his amber eyes were still bright with fear and loyalty. Ranger let out a low growl the moment he saw Holt returning down the hall, mistaking the detective's stance for a threat toward Jack. Emily rushed to Ranger's side. "Easy, boy. It's okay." Ranger's body quivered, but he allowed her to gently hold his collar. Jack approached cautiously. "He thinks I'm in trouble," Jack murmured. The thought hit him harder than he expected. Ranger, battered and half-frozen, still fought to defend him. Emily checked the IV line and whispered, "He's protecting you the same way he protected that kid." Jack's chest tightened. He crouched beside the dog, placing a steady hand on Ranger's neck. The shepherd's breathing slowed the tension easing beneath Jack's palm. "Good boy," Jack muttered. Then Ranger suddenly jerked his head toward the far hallway, toward the same direction he had growled at earlier. Emily frowned. "That's where you heard the footsteps, right?" Jack nodded, his jaw tensing once more. Together with a hospital security guard, Mark Ellison, a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with dark, curly hair and a calm, reliable presence, they followed Ranger's gaze. The hallway was dimmer than the others, the overhead lights flickering softly. Mark pulled out a flashlight from his belt, its metallic body worn from years of night shifts. "This corridor leads to the back exit," Mark said. "Usually locked. Storage rooms, supply closets. Not many people come here." Ranger limped forward, nose twitching. Every few steps he paused, sniffing the air with intense concentration. Jack kept close, feeling a chill crawl up his spine, unrelated to the cold. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. At the end of the hall, the back exit door stood slightly ajar. Snowflakes drifted through the crack like ghostly fingerprints. Emily gasped softly. "That was closed earlier." Mark pushed the door open fully. Outside, a patch of snow lay disturbed. A thick rope, frayed-stained, lay half-buried in the white powder. Jack crouched down, lifting it with gloved fingers. His heart hammered. The rope matched the red grooves burned into Evan Miller's wrists. Ranger growled, sniffing the air desperately. A few feet away, a dark shoe print, stamped deep into the snow, pointed away from the hospital. Heavy hurried. Nearby, a torn piece of a black hoodie clung to a bush smeared with dried blood. Mark knelt beside Jack. "Looks like a struggle," he muttered. Jack's pulse slowed but deepened, heavy with dread. The footprints were fresh. Too fresh. "He was here," Jack whispered. "The one who did this to Evan." Emily stepped beside them, her breath trembling in the icy air. "Jack, do you think he followed you?" A cold wind swept the back lot, carrying the faint metallic scent of something still lingering. Ranger stiffened, fur rising, staring toward the tree line beyond the fencing. Jack swallowed, hard eyes narrowing into the distance. "Either he followed us," Jack murmured, voice low, "or he was already here." A thin, late-morning haze drifted across the hospital courtyard, soft light filtering through the frosted windows, as if reluctant to touch the cold reality inside. Jack Whitmore stood in a quiet corner of the emergency wing, hands braced on the window ledge, watching the snow melt in slow, trembling rivulets. The silence of the corridor pressed on him, not empty, but sharp, as though the world was holding its breath for a truth he wasn't ready to hear. He felt the old, familiar heaviness settle on his chest, the same weight he carried every year since the day he lost his daughter. It pulsed now with a frightening intensity triggered by the image of Evan Miller's battered body lying beneath bright surgical lights. Jack's storm-gray eyes darkened, as if absorbing the shadows around him. He wasn't a man who showed emotion easily. Years of isolation had welded steel into his exterior. But inside guilt still lived like a parasite, coiled breathing, waiting to tear open every time a child or young person suffered. He hated how helpless he had felt this morning carrying Evan through the forest, feeling the boy's breath flicker against his shoulder like something slipping away. Losing another young life, even one he didn't know, felt unbearably close to the nightmare he'd lived once. A set of footsteps approached. Detective Raymond Holt moved toward him, his stern expression softened by something Jack couldn't immediately identify. Perhaps respect, perhaps caution. Holt's tall frame and square jaw gave him a commanding presence, but his eyes, usually skeptical and sharp, held a more measured weight today. "Mr. Whitmore Holt," said voice low. "We've identified him, the victim." Jack turned tension rippling through his shoulders. "What's his name?" "Evan Miller, 18. Missing for 9 days. Jack exhaled slowly, jaw tightening as cold anger curled through him. 9 days. Long enough for terror, starvation, and torture. Long enough to break someone? "Parents?" Jack asked quietly. Holt nodded. "They've been searching non-stop. They're on their way now." Jack looked away, something in him recoiling from the thought of grieving parents. It was too close, too sharp. He could still remember the last conversation he had with his daughter, her soft laugh, the hopeful spark in her eyes, and the moment the world tore that from him. Holt continued. "There's more. The dog. We matched his microchip." Jack straightened. Ranger Holt nodded. "K-9 Ranger, search and rescue unit. He disappeared during an operation last week, same operation dedicated to finding Evan. A small explosive trap was triggered. His handler thought he died in the blast. Everyone did." Jack's brows drew together. He looked toward the treatment room where Ranger lay connected to IV fluids. But he didn't. "No," Holt said quietly. "He escaped. And from what we can tell, he followed Evan's trail alone, without food shelter or backup, for days." Something trembled deep in Jack's chest, a mixture of awe and a painful reminder of loyalty he once knew. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was a survivor, a soldier, a guardian who refused to give up. Jack murmured, "He kept that boy alive." Holt's voice carried reluctant admiration. He did more than that. He protected him, defended him, carried him, dragged him across the woods when he couldn't walk. Jack pressed a hand against the window frame, absorbing the weight of it all. "He's got more fight in him than most people I've known." Holt didn't disagree. Before either man could speak further, Officer Caleb Myers hurried down the hallway. His youthful face was pale freckles, stark against his skin, his sandy hair disheveled from running. "Detective Holt, we found something in the woods. You need to see this." Holt exchanged a look with Jack, an unspoken invitation. Jack didn't hesitate. The three of them headed out the rear hospital exit where security guard Mark Ellison was already waiting with a hospital vehicle. Mark's thick, dark curls were wind-tossed, and his brown eyes reflected unease. "The patrol team called it in," Mark said as they climbed into the vehicle. "It's bad. They drove into the forest bordering Cedar Springs. Snow coated the ground in uneven patches broken by deep footprints, markings, and tire tracks. Police tape sectioned off an area near a cluster of tall pines. Jack stepped out first, breath condensing in the frigid air. The forest felt unnervingly still, as if every branch was listening. Several officers were already combing the area. One of them, Sergeant Dana Brooks, a broad-shouldered woman in her early 40s with a stern expression softened by empathy, approached the group. She had short black hair, dark brown skin, and a commanding presence built from years of forest search operations. "Detective." She greeted Holt before nodding to Jack and the others. "We found a temporary hideout." She led them through the trees. The clearing was barely noticeable, hidden beneath a heavy canopy of branches, but once inside, the signs were unmistakable. A tarp stretched between two trees formed a crude shelter. Beneath it lay scraps of food, half-eaten granola bars, an empty water bottle, and moldy bread. Beside them was a piece of fabric Jack recognized instantly, part of Evan's hoodie torn and stained. "He was kept here," Jack said quietly. Sergeant Brooks nodded grimly. "At least for some time." Myers pointed to the far side of the clearing where a dirt patch had been uncovered. "There's more." A set of small items had been laid out on a forensic sheet, a pocket knife with dried blood, a coil of rope matching the one found behind the hospital, and a folded map. Holt unfolded the map, eyes narrowing. Several spots were marked in red ink, deep parts of the forest where no hiker should go. "These aren't camping spots," Holt muttered. "They're drop points, meeting locations." Jack's stomach tightened. So Evan wasn't the only one. Holt nodded. "We have reason to believe the suspect has taken others, or intended to." Something inside Jack ignited. A burning fury he had buried years ago surged back, searing through his chest. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles whitened. Holt noticed the change in him. Jack's voice was rough, scraped raw by memory. "I've seen this before." Holt waited. Jack's eyes darkened, his breathing slow but heavy. "My daughter, 16, taken from me. I was too late to save her." The forest held the confession like a fragile, painful truth. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the wind paused. Jack lifted his gaze, anger and resolve sharpening into something lethal. "I won't let another kid die because I wasn't fast enough." Holt exhaled, absorbing the rawness of Jack's vow. Ranger had followed Evan for days without giving up. Now Jack felt the same fire in his veins, the same refusal to let history repeat itself. This time Jack whispered, "I'm not too late." Wind tore through the treetops in thin, slicing currents, carrying the scent of cold pine and distant danger. The afternoon light was fading into a bruised gray dusk, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest floor. Jack Whitmore moved through them, with a grim, relentless focus, every sense sharpened to a blade's edge. His breath steamed in the air, the worn leather of his jacket glistening with frost boots crunching through icy underbrush. Beneath his hardened exterior, the storm within him churned fear, fury, and a wounded determination he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just hunting a criminal. He was hunting the ghost of the past that had destroyed him. Beside him, Ranger limped forward on trembling legs, his thick coat streaked with mud and dried blood. His left hind leg dragged slightly with every step, but the German shepherd refused to slow down. His ears were pricked, his tail stiff, his amber eyes locked onto a scent trail only he could see. Ranger was a creature carved from loyalty and pain, older than many working dogs around 7 years old. Muscles still powerful beneath his injury jaw, tense with instinct and memory. Despite his exhaustion, the dog's body radiated determination. This mission, this boy, this chase Ranger had made it his entire purpose. Behind them, Detective Raymond Holt and Sergeant Dana Brooks followed at a careful distance. Holt's expression, usually stony, had tightened with a tension he couldn't conceal. His broad shoulders moved with rigid readiness, the cold glint in his eyes showing he knew they were closing in. Dana Brooks, taller than Holt, her dark skin and short-cropped hair catching flecks of snow, kept one hand on her holstered weapon, and the other ready to signal the officers trailing behind. Officer Caleb Myers struggled to keep pace, his breath-ragged cheeks flushed from the cold. He wasn't built for long forest pursuits, but he forced himself forward, driven by the urgency of the case and a need to prove himself. Jack noticed Myers falling behind, but didn't slow. He couldn't. Every second mattered. Every second was a step closer to preventing the tragedy he had once failed to stop. Ranger suddenly halted, nose to the ground, body taut as a bowstring. A sharp bark tore from his throat, echoing through the woods. Jack stiffened. "He's close," Sergeant Brooks whispered. Holt gave a curt nod. "Spread out. The suspect can't be far." Ranger shifted, pulling his weight onto his good leg and limping forward faster now, despite the pain. Jack stayed inches behind him, ready to grab the dog if he collapsed, but knowing full well Ranger would never accept help, not until the job was finished. They moved past a cluster of fallen logs, across a narrow stream, half frozen with jagged white ice. Ranger's bark grew louder, fiercer. Jack's pulse hammered. He felt the presence in the air, the sensation of being watched. Then a harsh metallic clatter broke the silence. From behind a camouflaged tarp wedged between two pines, a man stumbled out, stuffing items into a torn black duffel bag. He wore a dirty gray jacket hood, pulled low, dark stubble covering a sunken jaw. His eyes were wild, sharp, frantic, cornered. This was the man who had taken Evan. He froze the moment he saw Ranger. Rage and terror crossed his face in the same instant. "No, no, stay back!" he screamed, grabbing the bag and bolting into the forest. Ranger lunged with a raw, pain-filled snarl, his body surging with a burst of adrenaline that defied his injuries. Jack didn't think he ran. His boots tore through the snow breath, burning his throat past trees and under branches that clawed at his coat. Ranger tore ahead of him, limping but astonishingly fast, driven by instinct and memory of the suffering this man had caused. Holt and Brooks shouted instructions behind them, but Jack's focus tunneled. His mind flickered with memories of another chase years ago, another forest, another child. He had been too late then, too slow, too broken to save his daughter. Not today, not this time. The suspect scrambled up a slope, snow sliding beneath his feet. Ranger bounded halfway up before slipping, yelping sharply as his injured leg buckled. Jack's heart twisted, but Ranger forced himself upright and kept going, refusing to surrender. Jack roared Ranger, but the dog didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The suspect glanced back, panic widening his eyes as he saw the shepherd closing in. He pushed harder, stumbling over fallen branches, crashing through thickets. Ranger leapt at him, pain be damned, sinking his weight into a final surge that sent the man sprawling toward a rocky ledge. Jack reached them just as the suspect flailed at the edge of a steep drop, loose stones tumbling into the darkness below. "Get back." The man screamed, voice cracking. Ranger growled, teeth bared, forcing the man backward with deliberate steps. One misstep would send him over the cliff, but Ranger wasn't attacking. He was controlling him, herding him like a trained K-9 reclaiming authority. Jack lunged, grabbing the man's jacket collar just as he lost his footing. The man's scream died in his throat as Jack hauled him backward, slamming him to the ground. Holt and Brooks arrived seconds later, weapons drawn, breath harsh. They cuffed the suspect while he spat curses and thrashed in the snow. Then the forest fell silent. Ranger stood trembling, every muscle quivering with spent adrenaline. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. His injured leg finally gave out beneath him. The shepherd collapsed. Jack dropped to his knees beside him, pulling the dog's head gently into his lap. Ranger's eyes fluttered, exhaustion washing over him like a tide he could no longer resist. Jack stroked the dog's fur, voice cracking in a whisper only Ranger could hear. "You did it, boy. You did more than any of us." Ranger's tail thumped weakly once against Jack's thigh. Jack leaned closer, forehead touching the shepherd's. "You did what I couldn't do years ago," he murmured, his voice thick with grief and healing all at once. "You saved a life." Ranger's eyes softened, and he let out a faint, weary huff before slipping into unconsciousness. Holt stood nearby, silent, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of respect and disbelief. No one spoke. They didn't need to. In the quiet cradle of the forest, surrounded by snow and shadows, Ranger had done what even Jack's haunted past could not. He had stopped the darkness from taking another victim. Morning light seeped gently through the high windows of Cedar Springs Medical Center, a pale gold haze melting the night's tension, but not yet strong enough to warm the cold, lingering in the sterile room. The sun rose slowly, as if cautious not to disturb the fragile peace inside. Jack Whitmore stood near the corner, hands deep in his pockets, the weight of exhaustion clinging to his tall frame like a second coat. His leather jacket, still stained with soil, and dried frost from the forest hung over the chair beside him. He stared at the floor more than at the bed, his storm-gray eyes shadowed by memories and worry. He didn't know how long he had been awake. He didn't remember when he last sat. All he knew was that the boy, Evan Miller, had survived the surgery, fought through the danger, and was now breathing steadily beneath the crisp white sheets. Evan's face, though pale and marked by thin bruises along the cheekbone and jaw, had regained some color. The 18-year-old's dark brown hair had been gently brushed aside by one of the nurses, revealing a quiet softness beneath the exhaustion. His eyebrows twitched now and then, as if his mind still battled the remnants of terror. Jack watched the boy sleep and felt a strange tug in his chest. Relief, disbelief, fear. The fear surprised him most. It wasn't fear of losing Evan. It was fear of losing again the lingering ghost of the daughter he once failed to save. The image struck him sharply, her face, her laugh, then the moment he identified her. A lifetime condensed into a single shattering instant. Jack swallowed, grounding himself. This time he told himself silently he was not too late. Evan's breath hitched suddenly. His eyelashes fluttered. Then slowly, painfully, the young man's eyes opened. For a moment he stared upward, disoriented, blinking against the light. Then he turned his head, saw Jack, and panic flickered in his expression. His dry, cracked lips parted. "Our Ranger." His voice was thin, trembling yet frantic enough to stab through the quiet. Jack raised a hand slightly, as if approaching a frightened animal. "Easy, son," he murmured. "You're safe." But Evan struggled to sit up, face tightening with desperation. Where's Ranger? He saved me. He didn't leave me, did he?" The fear in his voice clamped around Jack's ribs. He didn't answer immediately, not because he wanted to hide anything, but because emotion lodged hard in his throat. Before Jack could find the words, the door swung open softly. Emily Carter entered with careful steps, her blonde hair tied back in a tidy bun, her petite frame pushing a medical stretcher beside her. Her brown eyes were warm, but tired, the kind of tired that comes from caring too deeply and sleeping too little. "Someone wants to see you," she said gently. On the stretcher lay Ranger. His body was wrapped with clean bandages across his hind leg, an IV line running into his front paw. His head rested on a folded towel, but the moment he heard Evan's voice, his ears perked up. Evan choked on a sob. "Buddy, you're alive!" Ranger lifted his head an inch, tail thumping softly against the metal frame. The movement was weak, but it was full of recognition, full of love. Emily locked the stretcher wheels and stepped aside. Evan reached out with trembling fingers. Ranger pushed his nose forward until it touched Evan's hand. The boy broke down completely, tears falling silently onto the dog's fur. Jack felt something inside him shift like a frozen sheet, cracking under the first warmth of spring. He had seen devotion from dogs before, but not this. This was something deeper, something sown by suffering and survival. Evan cupped Ranger's jaw. "You came back," he whispered. "You didn't let me die." Ranger blinked slowly, his amber eyes soft, and nudged Evan's wrist as if saying, "I never left." The moment stretched delicate and sacred. Emily turned to Jack with a faint smile. He wouldn't stay still until we brought him here, she said. The vets tried, but he kept trying to get up. He was determined. Jack looked at Ranger and saw a reflection of himself, a creature wounded, yet fighting, haunted, yet loyal, broken, yet refusing to stop moving forward. It stole his breath. There was a soft knock on the door. Detective Raymond Holt stepped in, his broad shoulders, squared jaw, clean-shaven this time, his expression gentler than usual. Behind him came Sergeant Dana Brooks, tall and strong, her stern gaze softened by something like gratitude. Holt carried something small in his palm. "Ranger," he said quietly, approaching with measured steps on behalf of Cedar Springs Police Department. "We recognize your extraordinary bravery." He clipped a small silver badge charm to Ranger's collar, a K9 bravery insignia. Ranger's tail thumped once more, slower this time, but proud. Evan smiled through his tears. Emily wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. Holt looked at Jack. "You too," he said gruffly. "We would have lost Evan and the suspect if you hadn't intervened." Jack lowered his gaze. Praise had always felt too heavy for him. He wasn't sure he deserved it. His voice came out low. "The dog did more than I did." "Doesn't change the fact that you stepped in," Holt replied. Jack didn't answer. Instead, he stepped toward the door, intending to leave quietly, unnoticed. He wasn't made for rooms like this, rooms full of thanks and warmth. He was a man built from solitude and ghosts. But before he reached the hallway, Evan's voice, still weak, but full of something raw and pleading, called out. "Jack, wait." Jack stopped, slowly turned. Evan's dark eyes were glassy but determined. "You saved me," the young man whispered. "You and Ranger, I don't want you to go." Jack's breath caught. No one had asked him to stay, not since the day he buried his daughter. But now this boy, barely clinging to life hours ago, was looking at him like his presence meant something. Like he wasn't just a shadow passing through. Jack swallowed something loosening inside his chest. His voice came softer than he intended. "If you need me," he said, "I'll stay." Evan's relief washed over the room like sunlight. Ranger lifted his head and placed it gently across both their hands, creating a bridge between them. 3 broken hearts bound by survival and loss, now written into each other's stories. The morning light grew brighter, spilling across the room, illuminating them in a gentle, hopeful glow. And for the first time in years, Jack Whitmore felt the fragile warmth of something he thought he would never feel again: home. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or angels, but on tired paws in quiet rooms and through people who refuse to give up. Jack, Evan, and Ranger remind us that even in the darkest forests of life, God still sends light, often in the most unexpected forms. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others may find hope too. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and join us in praying that God watches over every soul facing their own battles today. May His grace guide and protect each one of you.